Good afternoon. Today, I'll be presenting on my research assignment for recent clients. My chosen topic for this presentation is on cryptocurrency regulations. Commodities Future Trading Commission, CFTC, and the Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC, a comparison of regulatory oversight in Singapore versus the United States with regards to cryptocurrency and analysis of advantages and disadvantages of each approach. I will finally conclude with a brief summary to wrap up the presentation. To start this presentation, let me introduce you to the entities that will be discussed about today. Starting with the SEC. The SEC is the US government's agency responsible for regulating the securities market and protecting their investors. The CFTC is an independent federal agency in the US which regulates the derivative markets. This includes futures, options, and swaps. Finally, we have MAS, Singapore Central Bank and sole financial regulator of Singapore. They oversee all financial activities of Singapore. After learning a bit about our entities, let's move on to the main discussion topics, the regulatory issues between the SEC and the CFTC. The first issue faced by the SEC and CFTC involves the regulation of stablecoins. So what are stablecoins? Simply put, stablecoins are digital representations of fiat currencies, or in some cases commodities, designed to maintain a stable value by pegging their price to the underlying asset. Now, returning to the core issue, regulating these tokens has become a point of contention due to uncertainty over whether they should be classified as securities or commodities. This confusion arises because cryptocurrencies are complex in nature and can have both characteristics of both securities and non-security commodities, depending on their structure and use case. As a result, both the SEC and CFTC assert jurisdiction, leading to overlapping authority and regulatory conflict. A notable example is when the SEC is perceived to have overstepped its boundaries by asserting control through enforcement actions. As shown in the example, the CFTC has publicly indicated that stablecoins should be classified as commodities. This stance is based on cases suggesting that stablecoins are primarily used for payments and trading in the derivative markets, which would place them under the CFTC's jurisdiction. However, the SEC clearly disagrees, as demonstrated by its enforcement actions against a company's stablecoin, which is deemed to be an unregistered security, as shown over here in the third paragraph. This conflicting approach also then has led to confusion and uncertainty in the crypto industry, creating unrest and diminishing trust in the regulatory framework. Without clear and consistent guidelines, it becomes increasingly difficult for companies and investors to understand which rules to apply and which authority to follow. Moving on to the second issue, jurisdictional overlap. As highlighted earlier, there's an ongoing confusion over which agency is the primary regulator for crypto. The SEC has often exacerbated this issue by taking a highly assertive stance in the efforts to control the crypto space. Its approach, commonly referred to as regulation by enforcement, involves filing lawsuits against crypto funds for non-compliance, even when the regulatory clarity on those actions is questionable. A key contributor to this ambiguity is SEC's reliance on the Howey test. This is to determine whether a digital asset qualifies as a security. This test introduces legal uncertainty for developers and investors alike, as criteria such as common enterprise and expectation of profit can be interpreted subjectively. A notable example of this jurisdictional tension involves Ethereum. In this example, the SEC argues that Ethereum should be classified as a security on the grounds that it constitutes an investment contract. However, as demonstrated in the reference court case, making such a claim would require clear congressional authorization, as seen over here, which in this context is lacking. Furthermore, the case highlights that the SEC may have violated the constitutional requirement of fair notice. Both the SEC and the CFTC have publicly agreed that Ethereum was not a security and even affirmed this stance shortly before the court case took place. This inconsistency raises serious concerns about regulatory overreach and fairness in enforcement. All of those can be found over here. In the next example, the SEC argues that proof-of-stake tokens can meet the definition of securities under the regulatory framework. For context, Ethereum initially operated as a proof-of-work token but transitioned to proof-of-stake in 2022. This shift has contributed to regulatory overlap and confusion surrounding its classification. These types of issues further reinforce the broader problem, a lack of regulatory clarity and uncertainty over which agency, if any, should be responsible for overseeing such digital assets. Now let's move on to the differences between Singapore's crypto regulatory system and the United States. First, there are several key differences between regulatory approaches to crypto in Singapore and the United States. The most notable is that Singapore has a single financial regulator, the Monetary Authority of Singapore, while the US has multiple agencies, including the SEC and CFTC, often leading to overlapping jurisdictions. Second, Singapore operates under a unified licensing framework for crypto firms, whereas the US follows a state-by-state approach. This means licensing requirements can vary significantly, with some states adopting more relaxed rules and others imposing stricter regulations. Finally, Singapore provides clearly defined categories for token classification, which helps avoid jurisdictional confusion. In contrast, the US elects a unified classification system relying instead on the Howey test, a method many view as auditor bias. These differences highlight the contrasting regulatory stability between the two countries, with Singapore offering a more streamlined and transparent framework. Moving on to the advantages and disadvantages of the two regulatory systems, starting with Singapore. One key advantage is that the Monetary Authority of Singapore, as a sole financial regulator, can streamline oversight across the financial and crypto markets without the complications of jurisdictional overlap. Additionally, the Payment Services Act establishes a comprehensive risk-based licensing framework. This structured approach encourages business formation and fosters growth by providing regulatory certainty. Finally, Singapore's clear token classification system reduces ambiguity, which enhances investor confidence and trust in the regulatory environment. However, Singapore's regulatory framework also presents a disadvantage. While the clear licensing and well-established systems provide stability, they also come with strict KYC, anti-money laundering, and cybersecurity requirements. These comprehensive regulations could result in higher compliance costs, potentially deterring smaller startups from entering the market. Moving on to the United States, one of its key advantages is that it's home to the largest venture capital markets in the world. This provides crypto projects with the opportunity to obtain legal clarity as well, raise capital, and scale into substantial legal boost. Another major advantage is that many prominent crypto organizations are based in the US, creating a robust ecosystem that drives global crypto adoption. Moving on to the disadvantages of US regulatory system. As discussed earlier, jurisdictional overlap and a lack of legal clarity are major issues which have created distrust in regularly overseeing crypto. The uncertainty about which rules to follow can deter individuals and companies from entering the market. Furthermore, the SEC's approach marked by enforcement actions is likely to push more crypto companies away, further stifling innovation and growth in the space. In conclusion, today's presentation covered the two major financial authorities in US and the Monetary of Singapore. I discussed the issues faced in the US between SEC and CFTC, followed by comparison of the regulations in both countries. Lastly, I highlighted the advantages and advantages in each system. Overall, cryptocurrency remains a relatively new concept. The US will need to refine its regulatory approach to reduce uncertainty and social unrest, while also capitalizing on the future opportunities that the crypto space holds.